scavenger who may or may not have used primitive tools to cut meat from carcasses left by carnivores in a large cave where organic materials sometimes burned for long periods. Or perhaps Beijing Man was himself prey to the cave's carnivores, for it seems unlikely he would have voluntarily entered such a cave, even to scavenge.
Huh.
All right.
Would have needed light, maybe, in the cave?
Yeah.
Or did he just go in there in the pitch black and
Yeah, I don't know.
cut animals up? Fire would have been handy, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Signs of cannibalism. On March 15th, 1934, Davidson Black was found at his work desk, dead of a heart attack. He was clutching his reconstruction of the skull of Sinanthropus in his hand. I love these weird, found dead at his desk, clutching this book, or the skull of Sinanthropus. I don't know, it sounds like myth-making to me. Shortly after Black's death, Franz Wiedenreich assumed leadership of the Cenozoic Research Laboratory and wrote a comprehensive series of reports on the Beijing Man fossils. According to him, the fossil remains of Sinanthropus individuals, particularly the skulls, suggested they had been the victims of cannibalism. Most of the hominid bones discovered in the cave were cranial fragments. Wiedenreich particularly noted that the relatively complete skulls all lacked portions of the central part of the base. He observed that in modern Melanesian skulls, the same injuries occur as the effects of ceremonial cannibalism. Besides the missing basal sections, Wiedenreich also noted other signs that might possibly be attributed to the deliberate application of force. For example, some of the skulls showed impact marks of a type that can only occur if the bone is still in a state of plasticity, indicating that the injuries described must have been inflicted during life or soon after death. Some of the few long bones of Sinanthropus also displayed signs that to Wiedenreich suggested human breakage, perhaps for obtaining marrow. As to why mostly cranial fragments were found, he believed that except for a few long bones, only heads were carried into the caves.
What?
He stated, "The strange selection of human bones has been made by Sinanthropus himself. He hunted his own kin, as he hunted other animals and treated all his victims in the same way." So they're hunting each other and bringing the heads of their fallen enemies into their cave and eating their brains? That's basically the idea here.
Wow.
Some modern authorities have suggested that Wiedenreich was mistaken in his interpretation of the fossil remains of Sinanthropus. Binford and Ho pointed out that hominid skulls subjected to transport over river gravel are found with the basal sections worn away. But skulls recovered from this dig were apparently not transported in this fashion. Binford and Ho proposed that the carnivores who had brought the hominid bones into the caves. But Wiedenreich wrote in 1935, "Transportation by beasts of prey is impossible. Traces of biting and gnawing ought to have been visible on the human bones, and this is not the case." He felt that cannibalism among Sinanthropus individuals was the most likely explanation. But Marcelin Buell, the director of the Institute of Paleontology of Humans in France, suggested another possibility, namely that Sinanthropus had been hunted by a more intelligent type of hominid. Buell believed that the small cranial capacity of Sinanthropus implied that this hominid was not sufficiently intelligent to have made either fires or the stone and bone implements that were discovered in the cave. If the remains of Sinanthropus were the trophies of a more intelligent hunter, who was this hunter and where are his remains? Buell pointed out that there are many caves in Europe that have abundant products of a Paleolithic human industry, but the proportion of deposits that have yielded the skulls or skeletons of the manufacturers of this industry is infinitesimal. So therefore, the hypothesis that a more intelligent species of hominid hunted Sinanthropus is not ruled out simply because its fossil bones have not yet been found. From our previous chapters, it may be recalled that there is evidence from other parts of the world of fully human skeletal remains from periods of equal or greater antiquity. For example, the fully human skeletal remains found at Castenedolo in Italy are from the Pliocene period, which is 2 million years ago. As we have previously mentioned, one reason that it may be difficult to resolve many of the questions surrounding Beijing Man is that the original fossils are no longer available for study. In 1938, excavations under the direction of Wiedenreich were halted by guerrilla warfare in the surrounding western hills. And later, with the Second World War well underway, Wiedenreich left for the United States in April of 1941, carrying a set of casts of the Beijing Man fossils. In the summer of 1941, it is said the original bones were packed in 2 footlockers and delivered to Colonel Ashurst of the U.S. Marine Embassy Guard in Beijing. In early December of 1941, the footlockers were reportedly placed on a train bound for a port of a name that I can't pronounce, where they were loaded onto an American ship, the President Harrison, as part of the U.S. evacuation from China. But on December 7th, the train was intercepted, and the fossils were never seen again. After World War II, the Chinese government continued excavations, adding a few fossils to the pre-war discoveries. So there you go. Bones vanish. Can't study them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've gotten good at that.
Yeah. But in this case, these are still accepted.
Yeah.
In an article that appeared in the June 1983 issue of Scientific American, 2 Chinese scientists, Wu Rukang and Lin Shenglong, presented misleading evidence for human evolution. Wu and Lin made 2 claims. One, the cranial capacity of Sinanthropus increased from the lowest level of the excavation to the highest level, indicating that Sinanthropus evolved towards Homo sapiens. And 2, the type and distribution of stone tools also implied that Sinanthropus evolved. In support of their first claim, Wu and Lin analyzed the cranial capacities of the 6 relatively complete Sinanthropus skulls, and they stated, the measured cranial capacities are 915 cubic centimeters for the earliest skull, an average of 1,075 cubic centimeters for 4 later skulls, and 1,140 cubic centimeters for the most recent one. From this set of relationships, they concluded it seems the brain size increased by more than 100 cubic centimeters during the occupation of this cave. A chart in the Scientific American article shows the positions and sizes of the skulls found. Locality 1, at locality 1 in the dig. But in their explanation of this chart, Wu and Lin neglected to state that the earliest skull, found in layer 10, belonged to a child, who, according to Franz Wiedenreich, died at 8 or 9, and according to Davidson Black, died between the ages of 11 and 13. They also neglected to mention that one of the skulls discovered in layers 8 and 9 had a cranial capacity of 1,225 cc, which is 85 cc larger than the most recent skull found in layer 3. When all the data is presented, it is clear that there is no steady increase in cranial capacity. In addition to discussing an evolutionary increase in cranial capacity, Wu and Lin noted a trend towards smaller tools in the cave deposits. They also reported that the materials used to make the tools in the recent levels were superior to those in the older levels. The recent levels featured more high-quality quartz, more flint, and less sandstone than the earlier levels. But a change in the technological skill of a population does not imply this population has evolved physiologically. For example, residents of Germany in 1400 and residents of Germany in 1990. The technological differences are awesome. Jet planes and cars instead of horses, television and telephone instead of unaided vision and voice, tanks and missiles instead of swords and bows. Yet one would be in error if one concluded that the Germans of 1990 were physiologically more evolved than the Germans of 1400. Hence, contrary to the claim of Wu and Lin, the distribution of various kinds of stone tools does not imply evolution. The report of Wu and Lin, especially their claim of increased cranial capacity in Sinanthropus, shows that one should not uncritically accept all one reads about human evolution in scientific journals. It appears the scientific community is so committed to its evolutionary doctrine that any article purporting to demonstrate it can pass without much scrutiny. So yeah, that's, and I couldn't show they do show this chart that they used, and it looks like, let's see, from 460,000 years ago to 230,000 years ago is the range of dates that they give for the earliest layer of this cave for the latest one.
Wow.
So you have, just under 200,000 years, or I guess 170,000 years, and they're implying that evolution was happening quickly enough for there to be an increase in cranial capacity of 85 cubic centimeters on average. But the earliest one that they start the measurement with is a kid.
Right, yeah.
So, I don't know. It's a little strange. All right, dating by morphology. Where's the watcher to make a joke? As we have seen in our discussion of human fossil remains discovered in China and elsewhere, it is in most cases not possible to date them with a very high degree of precision. What?
Dating by morphology.
That's how everyone does it, right? Finds tend to occur within what we choose to call a possible date range, and this range may be quite broad, depending on the dating methods that are used. Such methods include chemical, radiometric, and geomagnetic dating techniques, as well as analysis of site stratigraphy, faunal remains, tool types, and the morphology of hominid remains. Furthermore, different scientists using the same methods often come up with different age ranges for particular hominid species. Unless one wants to uniformly consider the age judgment given most recently by a scientist as the correct one is compelled to take into consideration the entire range of proposed dates. So in other words, I think what they're saying at the end there is like, unless you just arbitrarily decide that the most recent scientific paper on this is giving you the right numbers, you have to actually look at what a bunch of people have said about it. And there's this, across all this study, there's a big range.
Yeah.
Imagine that a scientist reads several reports about two hominid specimens of a different morphology. On the basis of stratigraphy and faunal comparisons, they are from roughly the same period. But this period stretches over several 100,000 years. Repeated testing by different scientists using different paleomagnetic, chemical, and radiometric methods gives a wide spread of conflicting dates within this period. Some test results indicate one specimen is the older one, and some indicate that the other is the older one. Analyzing all the published dates for the two specimens, our investigator finds that the possible date ranges broadly overlap. In other words, by these methods, it proves impossible to determine which of the two came first. So what is to be done? In some cases, as we shall show, scientists will decide solely on the basis of their commitment to evolution that the morphologically more ape-like specimen should be moved to the earlier part of its possible date range in order to remove it from the part of its possible date range that overlaps that of the morphologically more human-like specimen. As part of the same procedure, the more human-like specimen can be moved to the later or more recent part of its own possible date range, and thus the two specimens are temporally separated. But keep in mind the following. This sequencing operation is performed primarily on the basis of morphology in order to preserve an evolutionary progression. It would look bad to have two forms, one generally considered ancestral to the other, existing contemporaneously. Here is an example. A Chinese anthropologist from Yale University stated, the faunal lists for Ma-Pa, which Changyang and Liucheng hominid finds, offer no positive evidence for any precise dating. The former two fossils can be anywhere from the middle to the upper Pleistocene as far as their associated fauna is concerned. For a more precise placement of these three human fossils, one can only rely upon, at the present time, their own morphological features in comparison with other better dated finds elsewhere in China. This is called dating by morphology. Agener stated in 1981, in South China, the faunas are apparently stable, making subdivision of the Middle Pleistocene difficult. Ordinarily, the presence of an advanced hominid or relict form is the basis for determining later and earlier periods. So what they mean there by the fauna is stable is that the entire Middle Pleistocene period shows very little variation in animals. Mm-hmm. They stay the same. They don't evolve. They're not changing morphologically. Yeah. So you have this long period in which the animals are seemingly morphologically not changing at all. And so the only way they can date particular layers is by looking at what they think of as hominid remains and just saying that arbitrarily the ones that look more ape-like must be older.
Yeah.
So this is a very clear exposition of the rationale for morphological dating. The presence of an advanced hominid is taken as an unmistakable sign of a later period. In other words, if we find an ape-like hominid in connection with certain Middle Pleistocene fauna at one site, and a more human-like hominid in connection with the same Middle Pleistocene fauna at another site, then we must, according to this system, conclude that the site with the more human-like hominid is of a later Middle